My name's Craig Dixon. 38 years old. Uh, I've lost two brothers to suicide. The first brother, I come from a pretty big family. There was 5 boys of us all together. I lost my first brother, who was the second. I was the youngest. He was the second youngest. I lost him the day after my 14th birthday, May of 1990. And over 20 years later, I lost the next youngest or middle child, Barry, back in September of 2012. Both of them used the same method of suicide. They used a firearm to do it, and just been working through it one after the other. So he was the next brother up. He was 18 when it happened. He had a girlfriend. She was pregnant. Um, they apparently were having issues. I never actually saw the suicide letter. I've only heard from my parents the little bits and pieces that they were willing to share. My speculation is that there was some things in there that they probably didn't want me to know about, and that's fine. I'll trust their judgment in that. Um, 20 more years down the road, when my other brother, who I was the youngest, Jay was 4 years, just over 4 years older than me, and then Barry, who was my other brother that took his life back in 2012, he was the middle brother. So at 14, I lost my big brother. So I had 4 big brothers, and at that age, I lost my big brother. He was the one that I always went to. Barry's marriage fell apart. His wife was a drug addict. Barry himself was a recovering alcoholic, drug addict. And I had stopped talking to Barry. And he and I hadn't spoke for several months because of a situation that happened between him and Terry. And I got a call from my aunt. During that time, my parents had picked up and moved to Arizona. Their house had went into foreclosure. And I got the call one night about 1 o'clock in the morning that my brother Barry had went to the cemetery, and on the grave of my brother Jay had taken his life. And I was initially very upset. I was upset about the fact that I'd lost another brother. I was upset at the fact that it wasn't my parents that called to tell me that. It was an aunt. I was upset that I hadn't talked to Barry in a few months. Upset that, I mean, you name it. I was upset about it. I was upset because I felt like that there should have been something that I could have done, having experienced this before, even though at a young age I wasn't there. And wondering, does it ever end? Does that whirlwind of emotion that you try to go to sleep at night and you just can't find peace. That's the worst part, is just trying to find that peace and that calm in your mind that you lose whenever something like that happens, particularly suicide, when it's something that's very difficult to process. It's very difficult to find this, and to me, in my experience, it was difficult for me to determine it wasn't my fault. That's one of the things that I had a hard time dealing with, is what could I have done? What should I have done? How come I was blind to the fact that someone was feeling the pain that they were feeling, and then to be able to know that that was a unique situation that that person was experiencing. That was theirs. They own that. And I felt a lot of guilt for not being there. And it was just very difficult to be able to process those emotions. And thankfully my wife was there, and she helped me a lot through that. And it temporarily brought our family back together for a minute, and then everybody just kind of went their own way, and that's the way it's been for a few years now. Well, having been through loss 2 different times, um, looking back at the first one, which I think having 20 years to deal with that one hopefully helped. And I know that sounds horrible, but in being able to process that and to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. When I was younger, it was difficult. I don't know that I felt a lot of hope for a long time. And when I say a long time, possibly years, because I was continuously looking back on what happened and trying to get out of that stuck period where I just couldn't process. I just couldn't figure out what it was and trying to understand. And that's what I wanted to do so bad, was to understand what happened to be able to move forward. So there was a time, not too long afterward, where I had a very close friend, and to know that that support was there, to know that he was there to help me in dealing with that loss. I think that was the first point where I knew that it was going to be okay. I felt like that at that point, as hard as that was, that life was going to go on, and that I was going to be able to experience happiness. I met my wife very young, and that was a big part in helping go through that. So having that very close friend, and then being able to listen and to understand a little bit, and to know that I still had someone, because losing someone when you're 14 years old who is that, I guess, mentor figure to you, to know that you had someone else, and then to have the other brother, the next one up, to be able to sort of step into that role and know that I still was able to have a relationship with someone very close to me, not just a friend, but then also a family member, and then to be able to share some of the experiences that I felt I wasn't going to be able to have because I had lost my first brother. So I would say a combination of that very close support of friends, or specifically the one friend that I had, and then the improved relationship with my brother Barry. And then, of course, 20 years later, having that relationship sort of fall apart the way that it did, and then have to go through that again, it was very difficult. But having that 20 years in between, I had experienced other loss in my life. I had lost other significant family members. So the hope that I experienced first was reconnecting with my parents shortly after, and maybe seeing that event, as horrible as it was, an opportunity to rebuild a relationship with people that I hadn't before. You know the saying, if it wasn't for weddings and funerals, there's a lot of our family that we would never see. So to be able to reconnect with some of the family, I really felt hope at that point that we were going to be able to rekindle some of those relationships, to know that that support network is out there, to know that I was going to be able to build a relationship that I had lost with that brother when I would later on in life, really helped to turn more into a positive direction than to continue sinking into that darkness that you feel with loss. But for me, the hope was knowing that I had the support. I was able to rebuild relationships with people that I hadn't talked to in a while. Yeah, having lost a brother, two brothers, it was two different experiences for me in trying to support my parents and going through that. What made it difficult for me in dealing with that is I sort of put my emotions on hold for an extended amount of time and trying to support my parents. As a 14-year-old, you don't know how to. I mean, you really don't, which I think extended the time period for me, and being the brother of the victim made it difficult, because there was a time period between the event happening and the time where it felt like my parents were finally starting to develop mechanisms of coping. That's when I started dealing with it. That's when my emotions finally came to the surface, and that's when I found my support network, because I didn't want to have to put that on my parents. They were dealing with the loss of a child, and I didn't want them to have to deal with the emotions of another son and dealing with that, because I felt it was going to contribute to some of the negative emotions that they might have and make it more difficult for them to continue in their processing of the situation. The same thing happened the second time when my other brother took his life. My second to oldest brother, who had lost contact with him, took it very, very hard. Not to take away that, I mean, I had a loss as well, but helping him through it. So it was almost as if helping the parents cope, and then you help the other siblings cope. But for me, having my wife there, and I guess for whoever it might be, if they've lost a sibling, having someone to rely on. And if it's not a family member, then being able to reach out to someone like the Lost Program and helping someone, or having someone help them through the grief process. So it is difficult in trying to take the time to understand and to process those feelings that you have when you are kind of behind the scenes grieving, when you do have the parents that are kind of front and center where they deserve to be, because there's nothing that I can imagine in life that could compare to a parent losing a child. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay to do it on my own until the time presents itself that I can deal with it. My parents had moved to Arizona about a year or two before. I don't know the exact date because I had lost contact with them over some events in the family. But to see the family come together over a loss, and again, having that time period in between the first and the second, and seeing those things happen, and then to see this happen, I had not heard of anything like that happening before, and really sharing my feelings that I had held inside for a long time with my father especially, and to be able to share that and to know that I was able to do that, and then for everybody to come together, it really did help in dealing with that. I mean, the support of everybody coming together and knowing that we were there for each other. That was probably the biggest element in supporting each other and being able to get through that. Well, I guess it would, I, I don't know. I feel like it would depend on what their relationship was with the person. Someone that's lost a child, I remember talking to my parents and seeing the pain that they experienced. I can't imagine as a parent what the feeling would be in losing a child. I know that my parents made it through. I know that they deal with the pain still, but I know that being there for each other, my mother and father being there for each other, be there, be present, and just support them through their emotional journey that they're going to have.